Major conflict in the novella Art of Darkness. Culture of conflict. Kurt's character versus character. Marlowe, as a protagonist, is a smart guy who is a skeptic of imperialism, but as he was a part of the engineer group, his captain sent him out to Africa along the Congo Bay because one of the steamship's men was murdered by a Native American. But Marlowe did not know that. Once he gets to the Congo Bay, Marlowe meets a man whose name is Kurtz. Kurtz used to be a universal genius. But the longer he was on the Congo Bay of Africa, along researching about the Native Americans, he became insane and becomes one of the natives himself. Then Marlowe becomes obsessed with Kurtz and tries to bring him back to Europe. People who are around Marlowe began making him ask more about who Kurtz was. On my asking on who Kurtz was, he said he was a first-class agent, page number 32, unquote. Even saying he is a very remarkable person, unquote, page number 37, but with suspicions, Marlowe begins on a journey to figure out more about Kurtz. Soon he learns that there was a rumor about Kurtz that was very important to know. Its chief, Mr. Kurtz, was ill. Hoped it was not true. Mr. Kurtz was, I felt, weary and irritable. Unquote. Dan soon finds out Kurtz was the chief of the inner station. Getting more information about Kurtz, he soon tries to find him and actually try to have a discussion together, but soon turns from a discussion into an argument. Culture of conflict. Marlowe. Character versus self. Marlowe is tough, honest and capable to do most things, and he is independent, but sometimes he draughts himself and sometimes appears to be weak, and his adventure in Africa felt like too much for him because he started to become delusional, but he wanted to know more about Kurtz, saying, I would give some thoughts to Kurtz. I wasn't very interested in him. No, still I was curious. Soon after, Marlowe was learning more about Kurtz and actually got to know more about him and have a face-to-face argument and simple conversation with Kurtz. He soon realizes something more about himself after Kurtz dies. Marlowe realizes that he cannot completely sacrifice himself to society and make a big influence on it because of what has happened when he was away to Africa and actually was found everything and the imperialism. Character versus society. Marlowe took an adventure to the Congo Bay of Africa in 1890, and he was surrounded by imperialism and Native Americans who were insane but only tend to appear most throughout the days and nights. Marlowe was mainly surrounded by pilgrims, and along the journey he comes across cannibals. Marlowe was basically in a place where he is never thought he would be the one to see that he was around people who were mentally crazed in the mind, people who killed just to kill, and people who used to be average people turned to savage beasts. He was around imperialism. He seen African American slaves be beaten nearly to death and hung for what they did wrong. Even some of the women who were slaves were raped along the time he was there. After his adventure to meet Kurtz and talk to him, living back home with all this to be on his mind, he could not repair back to the person he once was because he was mentally, emotionally damaged to what he came back from. He could not keep his mind straight along to what happened in the society of the African Congo. Marlowe is one of these guys who just cannot stand a lie, cannot forgive the fault in others either. However, when he meets with Kurtz's widow, he cannot bring himself to tell her his last words and tells her instead his last word was her name. He is then surprised how simple it was and what beneficial effects it had. One interpretation is that the horror is a great emptiness, a profound nothingness that lies at the end at the heart of everything. Kurtz's fiancée is intended He suggested that she is the reason Kurds initially traveled to the region. For Marlowe, guarding Kurds' legacy is not inconsistent with isolation from society. Remaining loyal to Kurds is best done by remaining true to his experience and by not offering up his story to those who will misinterpret or fail to understand it. Marlowe knew that if the secret of Congo were to rest in Kurds, then the world outside the system could not be affected. However, not sharing the secrets of the natives, the evil of poor society outside the world is true that does not revolve under the morals of modernism and Europe traditions. Within the story, Marlowe being the protagonist in the story, he realizes he is dealing with more than he has to. With Kurds being another conflict in this book, Marlowe cares for him more than himself and basically becomes obsessive with Kurds, trying to learn more about him, seeing how or why he turned into one of the natives and why they treated him as a chief. Marlowe is even known to spend most of his day asking questions about Kurds and trying to get more information about him. After he finally realizes that he is going to talk to him face to face, but soon it turns into an argument and he does not get much from him. They keep Kurds captive to take him back home, but we learned Kurds was ill, so right after their last conversation, Marlowe and Kurds had Marlowe left the room Kurds was in, and Kurds says the horror, finally passing away. Marlowe and Kurds never really had a relationship, as you can say, but Marlowe was trying to get Kurds away from the natives to see if he had returned to the universal genius he once was. Throughout this book, Marlowe only had tensions on working and earning money, but when he got to where he had to work, he was shocked to believe in what he had got into. Conflict within Heart of Darkness. In the given text from Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad uses many different literary techniques to introduce and build conflicts that continue to develop throughout the text, some of which include imagery, setting, and personification to introduce, build, and continue to develop conflicts throughout the novel, one of which being imperialism. The imagery used to show the setting to the reader creates the mood of the text as well. Beyond the fence, the forest stood up spectrally in the moonlight. By using the word fence, Conrad shows us that the forest is cutting off people from entering or even exiting the forest. Conrad compares his surroundings with a place he knows, or that we can all imagine easily, a house with a courtyard. Through that dim stir, through the faint sounds, that lamentable courtyard, the silence of the land went home to one's very heart, its mystery, its greatness, the amazing reality of its concealed life. This is an example of mankind versus nature. It had become so pitch dark that we listeners could hardly see one another. The ability to see is one of the senses that people seem to be more afraid of lacking. Once a person can no longer see, they cannot tell exactly what is happening. With the character's ability to see cut off, we feel how dark the nights are and how dangerous it could possibly be for the men that are not familiar with the forest and surroundings. Another technique used is personification. The setting is personified often to give the reader the effect that the setting is human and can act like a human as well. Could we handle that dumb thing, or would it handle us? This shows that Marlowe is already worrying about the forest and the mystery behind it. Especially since before he went on the journey, the doctor he visited said that nobody had ever come back for a checkup. I felt how big, how confoundedly big was that thing that could not talk and perhaps was deaf as well. What was in there? From this excerpt, it can be seen that Marlowe is still questioning the nature of the forest and if it would swallow them up once they enter. Another place that Conrad uses the absence of noise to show that there is something odd about their location. I wonder whether the stillness of the face of the immensity looking at us how were meant as an appeal or menace. The word silence is what haunts the reader because a forest is supposed to be full of noise instead of silent. The words menace and appeal are words that are telling us of another conflict. Menace makes it seem like the forest has a personality that could scare the people from entering it, while the word appeal could affect the characters internally, causing internal conflict. The characters would not know what to think of their surroundings, and the word menace could be hinting to a similarity to imperialism. All in all, Conrad uses literary techniques such as imagery, setting, and personification to illuminate the conflicts that will be and are addressed in Art of Darkness. By using these techniques, Conrad is able to build the unease the reader feels from one section to the next to continue introducing, building, and continuing to develop conflicts throughout the text. Internal conflict in Art of Darkness. The novella Heart of Darkness was written in 1899. At the turn of the century, the author Joseph Conrad was 32 and lived through what he writes about. In A Journey Through Congo, Conrad uses the novella's central character Marlowe to represent himself and portray his experiences. Like many other writers and artists throughout history, people of his time did not appreciate his work. Even the true meaning of the novel was not understood until later. In the novella Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad uses a literal and figurative journey through Congo to portray an internal conflict that exists within the protagonist Marlowe. At this point, we are able to see the state of mind Marlowe was in. He seems to separate himself from the darkness. He sees himself as exempt from possessing darkness. This, of course, was just at the beginning of his journey. The author's use of words colossal, black, and creeping create a mysterious tone that makes the journey seem intimidating but at the same time draws the reader in. However, the phrase glitter of the ocean creates a stark contrast from the previous wording. The ocean symbolizes his path back home. Additionally, a theme of light and dark comes into play here. Going further into the continent means losing his innocence and an almost naive mindset. His understanding of what is truly dark would grow, and he would no longer be able to see his home and what he knew as light. Marlowe's internal struggles. Marlowe, the frame story narrator of Heart of Darkness, reveals his complexity early on by introducing deep internal struggles that menace him throughout the rest of the novel. On the literal level, Marlowe describes his journey down the Congo River during imperialist England. The greed, destruction, and dehumanization he sees leads to a series of ethical questions which Marlowe struggles to resolve. The narrator, however, differs from the rest of the corrupt company's imperialists in that he is able to identify the corruption of the company and admit the selfish motives of all the colonialists, including himself. Through the novel, Marlowe's troubling inner conflict with the nature of imperialism are shown through an ominous setting, frame story narrative, and theme of corruption. The main plot line of Heart of Darkness occurs in the jungles and rivers of the Congo. Marlowe's description of the nature can be seen as a metaphorical description of his internal struggles and confusion. The jungle is ironically portrayed as silent and mute, a stark difference from normally loud and vibrant forests. The silence of the forests also contrasts with the verbose manager, who is threatened by Kurtz's success. Marlowe's ironic description is thus purposely implemented to reveal how the stillness of the Congo tortures him. Furthermore, the forest is continuously personified to reveal not just the man versus nature conflict in the Congo, but even deeper, how nature is just a partaker in the man versus man conflict. Marlowe struggles to come to terms with the evil imperialist tactics and emptiness of the souls around him, causing him to lose himself. Later on, a large troubling fog settles in on Marlowe's steamboat, also implying Marlowe's loss of himself throughout the experience. Thus, the dark setting matches Marlowe's inner conflict. Marlowe's point of view and narration in the frame story also effectively reveal his troubles throughout the novel. For example, as a result of his confusion, Marlowe begins to fixate on Kurtz and obsesses over his large reputation. Marlowe, however, has never seen Kurtz and goes on to rhetorically question if the audience can see him. Do you see him? Do you see the story? Do you see anything? Thus, Marlowe takes us out of the story to show himself as a partaker in the story. Marlowe's point of view and narration in the frame story also effectively reveal his troubles throughout the novel. For example, as a result of his confusion, Marlowe begins to fixate on Kurtz and obsesses over his large reputation. Marlowe, however, has never seen Kurtz and goes on to rhetorically question if the audience can see him. Do you see him? Do you see the story? Do you see anything? Thus, Marlowe makes us out of the story to show himself as a partaker in the story. In addition, the unnamed narrator's commentaries on Marlowe's story further explore Marlowe's struggles. The unnamed narrator explains, I listened on the watch for the sentence, for the word that would give me the clue to the faint uneasiness inspired by this narrative. Here, the first person narrator acts as an outside source to further show Marlowe's anxiety and discontent. The unique setup of two narrators provide further insight into Marlowe's internal struggles. Lastly, Marlowe makes effective use of the theme of corruption, seen in The Greedy and Selfish Manager, as well as the treatment of Africans. Marlowe makes several cynical and negative remarks about the company's workers. For example, he describes the manager as a papier mâché Mephistopheles with a void instead of a soul. Marlowe's allusion to Satan reveals his negative attitudes towards them. He goes further later on to imply that the workers pretend to work in trade and civilize the savages when in effect they are just exploiting the natives and their resources to gain higher ranks. Thus, the theme of corruption further cements Marlowe's internal struggles. Marlowe, unlike the company's workers, does not think the natives are criminals or evil. Rather, he believes they are not inhuman. This retort reveals Marlowe's developing kinship with the natives, a bold statement which he troubles to come to terms with. The literary devices, including setting, point of view, and the theme of corruption, all work together throughout the novel to give us further insight into Marlowe's internal troubles. Throughout the novel, Marlowe becomes a victim of imperialism, the jungle and the Kurtz. The airy feeling the setting creates thus matches the uncertainty he feels and the ethical questions he develops. Marlowe never truly comes to terms with his views, but in the least he does recognize the faults of imperialism.